We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown remembered gate, when the last of Earth left to discover.
All right, Vic, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I'm super excited to get to talk to you. I forget how I found your Instagram page. I think it was like in the comments section of just some random post. And I was like, that looks like an interesting profile. I'm gonna check it out. And then I was looking at your stuff and I was just like, wow, this is like this I can really kind of relate to this. I really feel like I get you as an artist. And so I was super happy whenever you actually got back to me and said, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to come on the episode. So to start off, just because like I've done my own art throughout my life, and so I always like to get other people's opinions. But what does your creative process look like? Like what does it entail for you?
Oh gosh. I think it just starts with like feelings, big feelings. Um, and I think a lot of the things that I ended up posting and things that ended up resonating with people were feelings that were very hard to contend with. So conflict and grief and loss and sadness. Um, and I remember just like I would always be struggling with these things, and I found over time that the best way to process them and understand them was to sort of translate that into art. So whether that was painting or poetry or um, a comic, and I initially I just made these things for myself.
Mhm.
Um, but then it was like I would show one close friend, and then they would tell my other close friend, and I'd show them, and then eventually people were poking me saying, "You got to post this on the internet. You got to show people." Um, so that's how I started with that.
Cool. Yeah, I mean I love that sort of way that art works with people where it starts off as sort of like a an antidote for something that you're struggling with, and then as people start to see it, can relate to it. I mean, that's how I found you. I instantly related to what you were doing, and it like really fell into a lot of the pieces of my life. And so I that's kind of where I first knew like, hey, I can like I kind of get this person. And so that's cool to know. And so from that, I kind of take it that you are pretty conscious of the themes and like the messaging that you want to get through with your art. Am I right about that? Or is it more kind of like maybe subconscious and then you realize afterwards what it was that you were trying to get to?
I think sort of in the beginnings of my account's growth, it was a little
Mhm.
bit less. I was a little bit less aware of sort of what those themes were, and when I started seeing what people were really responding to, um, it helped me realize what those themes consistently were. Because I always used to tell people I don't really have a style. Like everything about my art is so inconsistent, and that's why the username is Fickle Vic, because I just can't be like pinned down to one genre of art. I just keep trying different things, and I don't. If I do the same thing twice, I think it would drive me crazy. So
Mhm.
everything that I do, I'm sort of trying something a little different from last time. But over time, based on the comments I was getting and things people were saying, it did become clear to me that, oh, there is sort of an underlying thing that unifies this art, and it's, um, I guess, this sort of like sensitivity. It's all very emotional.
What is it do you think throughout your life that like inspires your art? Like what is it that kind of creates it inside of you, do you think?
Mm, hard to say. I think that a lot of it comes from like there's a lot of sad stuff, but I think there's also a lot of funny stuff, and that comes from this weird desire that I have to romanticize my own life. Where I take these really mundane moments, and sometimes things that are, like a situation that kind of sucks, and finding something funny about it.
Mhm.
Um, and I can't do things that are hard hitting and emotional all the time because I think that would be deeply draining
Yeah.
for me, for one thing. So I think I'm constantly looking for these sort of moments of magic and meaning in an otherwise very average and mundane life.
Wow, that's really cool because I think with my own art, I kind of tend towards more like the writing side of things rather than the art side of things. Like in high school, I kind of did more of the like the drawing and the painting and all that, and then I kind of just leaned more into writing. But I think with me, something that I've found is it's really hard to like maintain honesty in what I'm doing, because I mean I can be honest with myself, but then it's like there's some sort of like disconnect between what I'm feeling and then like putting it down onto paper. Do you have that sort of problem whenever you're creating, or does it just kind of come out how it comes out?
Yeah, not so much. I think that vulnerability is something that comes very easy to me. It's a blessing and a curse.
Hmm.
I think that sometimes with the things that I share online, it's so raw and vulnerable that um, I have to tread carefully that I'm not creating like a parasocial relationship with my
Hmm.
audience. And I have to sort of try to keep some boundaries as a creator, but like also in my personal life as well. Like I've gotten a lot of very wonderful DMs and I've made like a lot of really nice friends from Instagram because of the art that I share. But I also have to remember like these are a lot of the time they're people that I know on a very surface level and I just have to sort of maintain a bit of a boundary. I think that the internet is such a beautiful thing in that in the way that it does bring everybody together with these experiences that we share. Uh, but yeah, just trying to thread the needle, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and just be
Hmm.
careful that I'm not um, that my audience isn't kind of crossing the line with me and that I don't cross the line with them.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that is definitely a hard line to tread. I think especially with kind of more of the graphic design side of the art world because like I mean, I keep bringing it back to like my own experience here, which I don't like that I have to do, but it makes it a bit easier to like contextualize in my head. But I feel like whenever it's like with me with like words, it's like easy to create this like alternate persona of like someone who I can be because someone isn't like seeing what's like kind of like myself. I don't know if that makes as much sense. But like whenever I'm looking through your page, I do see a lot of like you being like you kind of it seems like you open up a lot, and so it's interesting to hear that you have to be so purposeful about that parasocial connection and not wanting to like push that. And that's really, I think, a beautiful thing because I mean, it is weird with this like internetscape that we've created. We've created like the best way to connect with people, but it's also kind of the worst way to connect with people because like they only see the parts of us that we want to reveal. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. And I that's why I like the podcasting medium because it's like this is a way that I feel like, you know, me and my guest can be like we can open up about our ideas, but it's kind of feels personal even though people can also be listening to it.
yeah.
So I liked that you were talking about this like dichotomy between the happiness in your art that you try to pull from the sadness in your art. Like how do you go about doing that? I mean, because I found that very hard in my own life, like trying to find a something to laugh at like in grief but it kind of helps like it's a very good cathartic thing to do like how do you go about doing that.
Well, if I could use a recent example,
Hmm.
I recently tabled for the first time at a comic convention, and that was I have not made any money off of my art, with the exception of I had a comic that was up on itch for a while. But like apart from like everything on Instagram, I didn't monetize anything. And so me going and tabling was the first time I would be printing out my comics and selling stickers, and it was a very vulnerable and scary thing.
Hmm.
When I applied, I didn't even know if I was going to get accepted, so it was already like, oh gosh, here I am. And the imposter syndrome was so powerful and strong. But over the day, it started to shape up to be like, oh, this is manageable, and you know, this is something that I'm really enjoying, something I'd like to do again. And I was observing, you know, sort of like the culture of this space and what people do. And people would trade zines sometimes, like from artist to artist, rather than buying things from each other. But I was too shy to ask anyone if I could trade a zine with them. So I was walking around and I was just gonna buy things from people.
Hmm.
And I went to one artist table and they had some stickers that I really liked. And I was like, oh gosh, these are so great. You know, I can't wait to, maybe I'll buy these. And they asked me, oh, do you have a booth? And I said, yeah, I do. And so they suggested, well, why don't we trade zines instead. And you don't have to
Mhm.
buy it, you can just trade. You can trade for the stickers. And I said, oh, okay. So I ran back to my booth. I grabbed some zines. I came back, and I remember when I showed it to the person, their face fell a little bit, um, and they just kind of. I could tell they were so trying so hard to navigate this nicely, but they just were the words out of their mouth were, "I'm sorry. I don't really like art that looks like Steven Universe." And I remember in the moment I felt like I'm sure my face looked normal, but on the inside there was
Yeah.
like a deep inner crisis of like identity of like, oh my God, is that who I am? I'm just a Steven Universe adjacent artist, and my stuff is vapid and like not interesting to this artist who I think is really cool. And um immediately, like out loud, they start going like, "Oh, that was really mean. I'm so sorry," and they started walking it back. And I was like, "Oh no, no, it's okay. I actually have a lot of range, and I went to animation school, so like I know how to draw in
Mhm.
different styles." And so I showed them some other things, and they picked a different zine, but it ended up being a positive interaction. But I remember I walked away from it, and I was just stewing all day, like Steven Universe style. Ugh, horrible. Like I can't believe that that's all they thought I was. And I told a few friends that that interaction happened, and they thought it was funny, and they were just comforting me like, your art doesn't look like that. And I calmed down eventually. I was like, this is silly. But I remember when the festival was over, I went home, and I was like, I can make a comic about this. Like it's so unserious. In the moment, it felt so huge and insulting, and I was just like, this is actually really funny. The way
Yeah.
that I really like vastly overreacted to this situation on the inside. So
Mhm.
uh, I made a comic about that, just sort of the whole journey of like my identity crisis. And a lot of people really resonated with that one too. I didn't think it was going to take off like that, but it got so many comments and a lot of like really interesting discussion as well about um, in the art scene, there's this sort of stigma around like Cal art style. I don't know if you're familiar with
Mhm.
this.
Yeah,
Um,
it's where most of those cartoons came from, right?
yeah, it's sort
Yeah,
of this like bean mouth, like Gumball and Steven Universe, and I think there was a few others. I can't think of them right now, but
yeah.
this like one particular era and style of animation, and a lot of people just sort of like wrote it off as like vapid and like not original and like gross and hard to look at. And it's a shame because I think a lot of those cartoons were great, and like a lot of really talented people worked on them, but there was just a lot of really great discussion happening in the comments about like, hey, it's 2025, can we stop using this as an insult? And I thought like that was like a negative experience I had in my life, but it turned around into something positive when I made art about it.
Yeah, I actually I did see that post on your page, and I kind of found that amusing too because I think with my kind of my more cartoony art that I do, I always look at it and I accuse myself of being like an Adventure Time derivative artist because that was like the cartoon that I watched all the time as a kid. And so
Oh,
like I do like
great.
I'll do like the little ears on top of like the head because of Finn, and
Yeah.
I'll do like the Ice King nose and everything, and it's just kind of subconscious, and then I only notice it afterwards. But it is kind of funny because like what we're talking about with the internet, how it's like it's sort of the best and the worst. Um, it's sort of like that with art too, because it's like, why is it such a bad thing to be like kind of derivative of someone else? Like we can't all be completely original. I mean, it's the same thing with music where like people get sued all the time for making a melody that sounds too much like someone else. And it's like, we only have 12 notes to work with. I mean, there's only so much
Exactly.
we can do.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like we're at a point now where it's almost impossible to come up with something like truly original.
Yeah.
And if there was something that was truly original and not influenced by anything, I think it would just look or sound like absolute nonsense. Like it wouldn't be something that we could grasp onto or recognize. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that everybody's influenced by something, and it's beautiful, like the way that like generations of people and the art that they made have like funneled down into
Mhm.
present day.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sort of like as we get to a point, I mean, I think it's been like that probably for hundreds of years maybe, like where there hasn't really been much new things to say, but especially now because it's like now everything has been said that can be said. And so now it's sort of interesting. We've entered like this new age, it looks like, of art where like how do I put it? Like rather than creating something that's like, oh, this is like a Picasso style or a Michelangelo style, where it's like this, you can know instantly that that's that person. It's sort of like using the language of the styles that you are inspired by to kind of speak through a new voice rather than being like, oh, this is purely my own thing. I don't know.
Right.
I That's something I've thought about a lot too, because it's like, yeah, how original how original can we be? Like, what does originality even mean now?
Yeah.
Because I mean, with like AI and things like that, it's, you have basically a possibility for anything to be created. So it's like now it's just who's the person creating it. But I also wanted to ask you too. I One of my favorite posts that you had made was it. I think it was more recent on your page, so you might have pinned it, but I think it was from the end of 2024.
Mhm.
And it was you were talking about how you've dealt with the grief of your dad, and you noticed it while you were gardening, and then you started looking through his old photos, and it seemed like you kind of could see through the world through his eyes there for a second.
Mhm.
And that one really hit me recently because I've also had like a really major loss in my family here in the past like month or so. And so like it's still very fresh. And I feel like photos in this weird kind of way have become one of the best ways to remember what we've lost. And so while I was watching your slideshow of like all those different photos he was taking while he was on the road, I was like, like, wow, I, I can kind of see the world through his eyes too, like looking at it in this weird kind of way. So maybe if you wanted to talk about that a little bit, like what do you think is like so special about photography and things like that that can just like immortalize people's being?
I think the core of that um, particular piece was this sort of feeling of connection with my dad, even though he has passed on, um, in that moment that I think everybody experiences where you see something beautiful and you have this urge to take a picture of it.
Hmm.
And I didn't think about the slideshow or how I was going to put it all together until there was one day where I was out gardening and I turned around and I was like, oh, wow, the rose bush. Like, there wasn't a flower here last time. And I remember at first it was just sort of like a wow, like how profound that is because I think it was the day before Father's Day, and that was my dad's rose bush, and I had the feeling of like, would he be proud of how I'm taking care of it? You know, he was a much better gardener than me, and you know, there's like spots on the leaves, and I'm sure I'm doing something wrong, but here's a flower, and so I must be doing something right, and all the questions and things that I wanted to ask him and reach out to him, and that urge I had to just text him this photo, which is something that I would have done if he were still here. But I snapped the picture anyway, and I went inside, and that's when I started digging around, and I found those pictures that he had taken when he was on the road, and yeah, I just had that feeling of connection of like I saw something beautiful today. I took a picture, and he was over and over like out when he was driving his truck on the road. He would have these moments of like, this is gorgeous, and I'm going to take a picture of this because I want to show my family, my daughter, somebody I love. Um, and just how beautiful that was. That even though he's gone, that we're still connected in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, I had this like not really great teacher whenever I was in high school, but he said this one thing that has always stuck with me about photography. It would be funny if he's listening to this actually, because he'll probably remember saying this. But he said like, and I was in like eighth grade or something like that, that he couldn't understand why anybody would ever delete a photo like on their phone, even if it's of something completely stupid, because like he didn't go down the a picture is worth a thousand words, but he was like, I don't know why anyone would ever delete a photo on their phone because that's like a moment in time that's frozen now forever. And there was like I thought it was silly whenever he first said it, but the more that I've kind of like lived and I've thought about that, like with the photos I've taken, because like you look through your camera roll and you're like, like some of these are just like, why did I even take this? And
Yeah.
then there's one day like 6 years later where you look at that and you're like, that's why I took it. And it's like it was kind of like a little seed that you planted there for you to look at. Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Like it's a little seed that you plant to look at and it grows after a while and then it reminds you of whatever it was that you took in that moment. And it's kind of like journaling in that way. Because I mean, I think that's why like I journal, why I hear a lot of people journal where it's like when you have thoughts you wanna capture right then and there. and you don't want to lose it, but then you can look back on it later and you're like, I don't know why I took this or why I wrote this down, but I can feel that it was valuable. And there's something about that that sort of transcends time in a way. Yeah. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's beautiful. I do think that photography and even art and comics, like everything I
Hmm.
make, there's something so precious about the memories that they hold in that moment in time, whether it's like that you just snapped a picture or you wrote something down, because you can come back and revisit it and it just takes you there.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, wow. That's really good. I don't know where to continue from there. I think I did before we kind of get near the end. I wanted to ask you because another thing that I really liked about your page was like the videos that you had talking about your growth as an artist from whenever you first started as a kid up until now, and like how your art has evolved with who you are. Um, I mean, we were talking about photos and how they kind of like hold memories so concentrated like within them. How do you feel like whenever you look through those old sketchbooks from like specific years and you just like see who you were then and how much you've changed since?
I think I feel a lot of like softness for that child that I was.
Hmm.
Um, because I think that, even though I drew a lot of like really happy, I drew a lot of Pokemon as a kid, really. But I would draw a lot of like happy, smiling, cute creatures, and I would invent these characters all the time. And I look at that now as an adult, but I have the knowledge that uh, I made those things when I was, in truth, a very lonely child,
Hmm.
and a very sad child in a lot of ways as well. But I would turn to art as this like way to escape and comfort myself. Like the characters that I made were like people I wanted to be friends with or people I wanted to be. Um, and I just didn't stop. Like it was I wouldn't say an addiction, but it was certainly like something I really relied on to self-soothe and cope. And as I'm saying this out loud, I'm realizing I still do that today.
Yeah.
But it just looks very different now than how it did back then. And I
Hmm.
think that's beautiful that that's that through line through my whole entire artistic journey.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting too. And you had said this about like looking back at your drawings as a kid. I feel like we all kind of feel like that in some way, where it's like you, as a kid, you can remember all of the like the hardship and the sadness and things that kind of defined a lot of your childhood. But then for some reason, there's something about our brains where like when we think back to that, all that we can really remember is like happy moments. And I know
Hmm.
that there's a lot of sad moments that I can remember from my past, but it's like for some reason, whenever I'm thinking back to it, the first thing that comes up is always the happy. And it kind of creates this like cool nostalgia where it's like you really want to go back and then you're like, why do I want to go back? Whenever I was there, I didn't want to be there.
It's so true.
And
I
it's,
remember being a kid and just wishing that I was older. I was like, can I
yeah.
just get older already?
And then you get older and you're like, oh man, this sucks.
I just want to go back.
But then it's funny because it's like then you're older and you're like, oh man, this sucks. But then like, and I've had this experience too because I've been out of high school for like two years now, and it's like
Mhm.
even just thinking back to like the first year out of high school, like I sometimes wish I could go back there. And then I'm like, why do I want to go back there? Like it's pretty fine now. But then I'm like, I don't know, like, and it's kind
Yeah.
of like with the weather where people are always like, I want it to rain, and then when it rains, they're like, I want it to be sunny, and we can never like pick one thing that we like to be. Um, so I think we kind of already touched on this final question, but I like to sort of get everybody's ideas in a concentrated way at the end of all of our episodes. Um, so I've noticed in my own life, and I've heard it from a lot of people, and so I want to get your thought on this. How has your artistic journey, sort of from being a kid to being an adult now, and then from wherever it's going to go in the future, how has that changed you as a person, but not only changed you, but like made you realize who you were all along?
That was a very thought-provoking question. I, I think it's kind of hard for me to zoom out and look at it that way because I think that my identity and like art have always been so deeply intrinsically linked together. Like it feels like breathing when I put pen to paper, and it I don't know if this is going to sound really kooky, but I do feel like me and my art were one and the same.
Mhm.
And so the growth that I experienced as an artist is in turn the same growth that I experienced, emotionally and maturing as a human being and all those things I learned, they're all reflective in my art in some way, I think, if I look back and I really analyze it. Um, it was just really a tool that I used to. Well, I don't even want to reduce it to like the word tool because it's so much more to me than that. But it's something that I use and I do out of the complete impulse and need to do it. Because if I don't make art about the thing that I'm feeling, I feel like I'm going to explode. Like I have to externalize it somehow. Um, and I'm just really grateful that I have that ability because a lot of people don't, and they'll sort of bottle things up until there's a breaking point and it's very messy. But I'm just deeply grateful that I have this outlet, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it. I don't want to add anything onto that and ruin it. That's really beautiful. I mean I totally get that. That's how I feel too, where it's like if you don't do it, you're just gonna like blow up one day. And
Hmm.
sometimes you don't do it for long. I mean, at least in my life, sometimes I don't do it for long enough, and then I do just kind of explode, and then it's like, okay, now I have to try to figure out how to put everything back together. And
Yeah.
so it seems to just be easier and healthier just to make it a constant practice of like every time I feel I need to do this, that's whenever I need to go and create something. But
Yeah.
well, thank you, Vic, for coming on this episode. I actually don't even know how long we went today, but this was a really great, like the time kind of just felt like it turned off there for a second. So that was really fun.
Thanks for having
Well,
me.
yeah, no problem.